social language actually is like 65% of what we use in our day to day. And most of the time, that language is positive or neutral, and some proportion of it is used to judge or shame free riders. And these are the people who take the benefits of sociality but decline to pay all of the costs. So that made me just start to think about, oh, interesting, like what's an example of like a free rider in the knitting world?
Not that all gossip is this kind of positive. Sometimes it's really just bitching. And
Yeah,
I'm curious
completely.
where we see that as well in Craftsnark.
I see deep brick red, slick cherry red, shiny rosy red, candy apple red, Estella deep red on your face, 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 face.
Hello, and welcome to Two Women Yelling About Knitting, a show that is not about what we're buying or what we're making, but instead asks questions like, does gossip have a place in knitting? This is a space where we look up from our works in progress and acquisitions and talk about what we see in the wider world of knitting, its political, social, and historical context. But don't worry, it'll be fun. I'm Anjali, and I'm a knitter in Denver, Colorado.
I'm Alison, and I'm a knitter living outside of Washington, D.C. We're friends who share a love of knitting, as well as an interest in a lot of sticky topics that relate to knitting. Things like politics, mental health, intellectual property, and more. We're recording another 6-episode season with a new episode and a new topic every 3 weeks. If you want to join us on this journey, hit the subscribe button to follow along. Anjali, what are we yelling about today?
Today, we are yelling about gossip and its place in knitting over time and in the current space. I feel like there's kind of always beefs and drama in the knitting world, but just lately there have been a couple that have come to the forefront that, because I think of things like social media and the internet, we are all talking about in a way that we wouldn't have been if it was 10 or 20 years ago.
Or we might have been doing it, but in the secrecy of our own homes.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
It would have just been a smaller group that knew about it.
Exactly.
Or we would have sent each other chain letters or something. I don't know.
Yes,
Zines.
which the kids still do. We
That's
also have
great.
to shout out our mind meld is complete, and we are now twins, totally unintentionally, in our sweaters. Tell me about your sweater, Anjali.
It's the Cozy Classic Raglan Light by Jessie Made. And this is actually the first garment I ever made. I remember sending you pictures of it, and you're like, oh my God, your first garment is a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair. You're crazy. I didn't know I was getting into.
But it looks gorgeous.
I love the color. Yeah, it's linen quill and the Pearl Soho tussock silk mohair.
I also really like how high I'm looking at mine, and I'm like, oh, I want my neck to be a little bit higher. I like that. Mine is the Poppy Tee, which is petite knit, but I added sleeves. It is knit in Miss Babs. I want to say it's Katahdin, which is like a light fingering. And the cuff is actually, I don't know, it's hard to, but the cuff is just that. Whereas that I held it with a knitting for olive mohair, their mohair, silk mohair.
Yeah.
I think held together for the body. So
yeah, we're celebrating our last episode of the season with our matching outfits. So our opening question today, Alison, is, has gossip ever been a part of your knitting life?
So really not. I think because knitting has been such a solitary experience for me most of my life, the social piece of my knitting life really has mostly been online. And so I guess I engage with the gossip in that kind of parasocial way. Like, I'm aware of the larger gossip in the knitting world, but I can't say I engage in gossip on a personal level with my knitting. But how about you, Anjali?
Yeah, I mostly have also had knitting as a solitary pursuit. But when I lived in Japan, when I was teaching English in the early 2000s, I actually started a knitting group in the small area that I lived in. So it was technically a city, but it was a pretty small area. So my second year there, some new people came in the JET program, which is what I was teaching English through, that also were knitters. And so we started having a weekly knitting circle, basically. And just being in like kind kind of a smaller city where it was very like small number of people who spoke English, like obviously the small community of everyone in the JET program in that area. So definitely like talking about each other and sharing news about other people in that group was part of that knitting circle. So not necessarily in like a bad or malicious way. And today we'll talk about sort of the different dimensions of gossip, but definitely talking about people who weren't in the room and sharing information with each other while knitting.
Yeah. Oh, so it's such a great way to get into the topic, because I think that is something that we were both interested in our research and in just thinking about the questions behind this bigger question. And the idea of gossip as being inherently negative, super gendered. We'll talk about that. But that it doesn't have to be that way. And we're kind of interested in that as well. It's like, what is the purpose of gossip? How does it interact with knitting in both positive ways and in negative ways? So just a little bit on the history of the idea of gossip first. The etymology of gossip has a very gendered aspect to it as well. It derives originally from the term godsib, which was like a baptismal sponsor for a baby. And they were people who were also very present around childbirth, which was a female experience in the, let's call it Middle Ages. That's kind of broad enough, but that's when this word kind of came about. And childbirth was really confined to women. And so it had more of this, it was more about friendship and community than it was necessarily about any sort of like conversation or what we think of as gossip today. But then, of course, it progresses in terms of meaning and goes from referencing close female friendship, even with like a spiritual element behind it, to being specifically about, you know, quote, idle female chatter with a more of a negative connotation to it.
I feel like when we were first talking about this concept, we had different ideas about what gossip is. And like I saw it in more of like a general way, not necessarily negative, but I feel like in your mind, you were describing it as like something that was inherently negative. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I think so. But I'd say my mind has been changed, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So then I was like, wait, is it just me? Like, am I just or maybe I, because I love the podcast Normal Gossip, which we'll link to below if they have an episode about knitting, that I can see like both the positives and negatives. But actually, academics have been looking at the topic of gossip for a while. Some academics did a systematic review of the gossip research to try to see like, how are we defining gossip? Like, how is science defining this term? And so they found two essential characteristics between all the studies that they looked at. And one was that gossip is communication between humans involving a sender, a receiver, and a target. And two, that the target is absent or unaware of the communicated content. So basically, two people talking to each other, at least two people talking to each other about a third party that is not present. And so it doesn't have to be positive or negative, although it sometimes can be.
Yeah. And I think that piece of the absent person, right? This is distinct from let's sit around and talk about our own lives. This is let's talk about other people. Again,
Right.
Not necessarily in a bad way.
It's hard to talk about your own life without talking about a person that's not there. Like,
That's
unless
true.
you're only talking about something you did. by
Well, and now
yourself.
I wonder, and we can cut this, but now I wonder if gossip, like if you are involved, is it no longer gossip? If you're like, this is what I did with this other person who's not here. I don't know. That's a question for the true academics.
Yes. Well, if you are an academic doing gossip research, please
Any
let us know.
sociologists out there?
We
who
do have a
wanna-
sociologist viewer. Hi. Who always
Hi.
leaves interesting comments. So if you have any thoughts on gossip, please
Please
let
chime
us
in.
know.
So the etymological background of this word having already a gendered piece to it. What follows is the idea of gossip and women's work. So again, Elizabeth Wayland Barber, patron saint of this podcast, at least from my perspective, shout out to her in her book, Women's Work, The First 20,000 Years, really points to the communal, like non-dangerous nature of women's work historically, and a huge part of that being textiles. That kind of work environment lends itself to conversation, which is kind of the basis of gossip, like being able to have extended periods of time in the presence of other people is going to lead to talk, and where that talk goes can be in part gossip.
And it's funny because if you look at the like modern day research around gossip, so much of it is about gossip in the workplace. And this is
Totally.
like the workplace.
Yes, exactly. But again, workplaces in this historical context being more gender defined or gender segregated spaces. And so the association with this kind of talking and with women, there are a few depictions of this that are kind of fun to share. One I was particularly interested in is a Bruegel painting from 1559. The painting is called Netherlandish Proverbs. We'll put it up here. And it's this, very traditional, like Northern European painting of the time, super detailed, lots going on. And each kind of like segment of the painting or each little scene is a visual depiction of a Flemish proverb. And so one of them in particular is the personification of the proverb, one winds on the distaff while the other spins. It shows these two women in the process of spinning yarn, having this like close conversation. The distaff is what the fiber was kept on. And distaff is such a female coded idea. Like in genealogy, the distaff side is your maternal line because the distaff is where you hold the fiber that you then lead onto your wheel or your spindle or whatever it is. And it's so associated with women that became a term. The meaning of that proverb is about spreading gossip. So the proverb about spinning yarn, literally it means gossiping. We also have this painting, 1901, Jean de Blas, I'll probably say that wrong. Any art history viewers out there, feel free to correct us. Called The Friendly Gossips. They're sewing, right? Still textile related. And, you can see that they're enjoying this conversation. This kind of guy is walking in like a little bit awkwardly, like not part of the conversation.
Get out of our conversation.
Yeah. He's like, oh, whoops, sorry. Okay.
Maybe I'm talking about him.
Oh, very possibly. And then, of course, there's a lovely drawing, which we originally had wanted to make our logo, which then we couldn't do for copyright purposes, but we can show it here for fair use. Rothko's sketch called Two Women Leaning Back in Sofa Knitting. And so again, just this idea, right? We both said at the beginning of this podcast that our knitting is kind of solitary for us, but for so much of history, these kinds of pursuits were communal activities, which people aren't sitting around and doing in silence, right? It lends itself to the community experience of conversation and discussion, which then gets us to like the more modern day stitch and bitch. That's literally what it is. Like getting to like, that's what the bitch part of it is the verb
Complaining
of it, which fun fact too. I mean, and we think about it, gossip is both a person, someone can be a gossip, but also to gossip as a verb, being both of those, having both of those parts of speech. Backing up a little bit, in my research on gossip and knitting, I literally Googled it, gossip and knitting, and found this New York Times article from 1883 that's a knitting pattern, but that was called, the headline is Gossip About Knitting. And so it's like even just the pattern itself, like sharing this idea, thought of as gossip because it is a feminine space. Oh, I also found this lovely two like academic projects, which just love to see as a former teacher. One is an art book out of RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, called Gossip, an Investigation into the Feminine Art of Conversation. And we'll link to it below. The book, quote, explores the relationship between gossip and textiles, which I kind of loved. And then extra shout out to not just the former teacher in me, but the former Latin teacher in me. A very cool thesis from just 2 years ago out of Vassar called Ritualizing Language, Ancient Greek Women's Gossip and Magic as Intertwining Subversive Paths to Justice. So that maybe less on the textile front, but definitely on the gender and gossip piece. And I really like, too, this idea of subversive paths to justice. What I like about that is in terms of this positive piece of gossip, the idea that gossip, that women talking to each other, Women Talking, which is a movie I never saw, but I really wanted to see. Did you see it?
Which one is that?
It's a couple years ago. Like Jessie Buckley was in it, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I do remember hearing about it, but no, I never saw it.
I was reminded of this movie, Women Talking, about women in a Mennonite community where there is gendered violence happening. And the idea of like gossip being a path to communicate really actually valuable information. like stay away from this person kind of thing.
Yeah. So that goes well into what I found in my research that sort of changed the framework for how I'm thinking about gossip now, and sort of actually changed what I had planned to talk about in this podcast. And it was this highly cited article paper by a British biological anthropologist, evolutionary psychologist, and specialist in primate behavior. And in 2004, he wrote a paper called Gossip in Evolutionary Perspective, or I.M. Dunbar is the name of the researcher. It has a great opening. For reasons that are not entirely clear, gossip has acquired a decidedly shady reputation. It is seen as malicious, destructive, and largely reprehensible. But then he goes on to say that without gossip, there would be no society. In short, gossip is what makes human society as we know it possible. So this is kind of his thesis that he is laying out based on his, specialization in primate behavior and evolutionary psychology. So he is saying that language developed kind of to take the place of what grooming behaviors do for primates. So grooming behaviors help primates deal with the stress of like living in large groups and like the social costs of living with others. But primates, because you can just groom one-on-one, basically, primates can have maximum group sizes of about 80. Because that's kind of the number of primates that can groom each other and stay not stressed out and like be able to live with each other. So he contends that language is how human beings are able to live in larger groups, because obviously if you're speaking, you can speak to more people at once. It's not just one-on-one. And so that opens up the size of human social groups to about 150 people. And language and conversation, social conversation in particular, are what kind of ease the stress of living in close proximity to others. So he sort of draws a line between people who believe that kind of the technological or economic uses of language are like the proper uses of what language should be, talking about science, talking about math. And although he doesn't specifically bring gender into this, like that, to me, I can see that clearly in the world around us, that like certain topics are seen as more serious or worthy of time than others, and that social language is not seen as important and not seen as worthy as these other types of language. But in the research he's done, social language actually is like 65% of what we use in our day-to-day. And most of the time, that language is positive or neutral, and some proportion of it is used to judge or shame what he calls free riders. And these are the people who take the benefits of sociality but decline to pay all of the costs. So that might be someone who is perpetrating violence against women. Like that is someone who is enjoying the benefits of living in close proximity with other people, but not adhering to the social contracts of we don't perpetrate violence against each other. And so that made me just start to think about, oh, interesting, like what's an example of like a free rider in the knitting world? And just off the top of my head, I was thinking about, people who are sharing or selling others' copyrighted designs without permission. So they are enjoying the benefits of the sociality of having other people develop these patterns without paying the costs. So profiting off of it without paying the monetary cost.
I love this train of thought too, because it goes so far back, right? To be like pre-human, like evolutionarily, like how does this function in terms of why humans are humans? And then of course this other massive turning point we've had in our lifetime, which is the internet and
Yes.
digital spaces. So in your thinking about this, in your research on this, how does this idea of gossip or who these free riders are or how we talk about them, how is that influenced by internet communities, social media and the like?
So that was something I was definitely thinking about. So the purpose of talking to others about these free riders, gossiping, talking about them when they're not present, is to warn other people about their behavior, because you want to warn other people to not take the behavior of these free riders at face value. Like you want to make sure they have all the information. According to this evolutionary researcher, that is why we gossip about bad actors. So just thinking about, pre-internet knitting gossip, that would be, who would the free riders of those circles be? I think it's probably more likely to be just people in your physical community.
The gossip may or may not have anything to do with knitting, right? It's not like
Exactly.
we're sitting
Yeah.
around knitting talking about this other person who's not in the room and how her knitting is better or worse than your, right?
I mean,
Like,
maybe.
sure, but like that
I'm sure there's some of that. Yeah.
but that so it's both the spaces around knitting, but then we're also curious about when the gossip itself has to do with knitting very specifically.
Yes. And so internet communities and social media definitely have changed that, because you're in these spaces with people that you don't live in physical proximity with. And instead, all you know them for really is their knitting, especially when it comes to like knitting influencers or people on social media, knitwear designers. Like the knitting is the thing, is part of your life. So just kind of like then taking the next step, who are these knitting free riders in the age of the internet? I would say it's people that violate the knitting norms and values, but it's not like there's some Bible or like other religious book of knitting that tells us what our norms and values are. So how do we find that in the age of the internet and social media? I think that can explain some of the sort of big breaks that have happened in knitting culture, and to kind of track and enforce those knitting norms and values. I see it as places like Craftsnark, the subreddit community, as like a space that's enforcing contemporary social media knitting norms and values and letting other people know about the free riders in the community.
Yeah, so I will say you are the Craftsnark expert.
Oh no.
No. In a good way. You have like more internet savvy than I do. Well, this is to say, so I will like look up something, and so often if I do have a question that I would say is more on the gossipy side of knitting, one of the first hits I get if I Google it will be though Craftsnark. Like that is where people come to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, I want to hear from you what examples you've seen of Craftsnark in that kind of like calling out the free rider side of things. But then are there also parts of, I mean, I think we agree there are parts of it that are truly, it's not that all gossip is this kind of positive. Sometimes it's really just bitching. And
Yeah.
I'm curious
Completely.
where we see that as well in Craftsnark, for example. What are some examples you've seen?
So I'm just going to right now talk about general examples, and I think in a bit we'll get into dig deeper into a couple examples. But for example, what we talked about in our last episode, designers who seem to be taking advantage of test knitters. So that's something that, the designers are seen as violating this social contract and really like using the test knitters for labor without giving them, like living up to the expectations that the test knitters came in with. Also things like yarn brands using AI. So that seems to have arisen in the last year or so on Craftsnark as like a norm and value that's very important to a lot of the people that post in that forum, is that if you are creating something in your craft, then you cannot also use or support generative AI. So whether or not you agree with that, that's definitely like something that is pretty strongly enforced in that space. Or for example, I've seen a lot of posts around like if there are indie designers who are selling their yarn and then they don't actually mail it out. They have some sort of public meltdown and don't provide the items that were paid for by customers. So I'm sorry, indie yarn dyers. So that is obviously something where people are trying to warn others about this free rider in the yarn world. And it's interesting because Craftsnark has a rule that you cannot be vague about what you're referencing to.
You can't
have
be like,
to
this
name names.
Well-known indie dyer.
you can't.
So you have to be specific. And if you're not, they'll like take down the post. Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Because there are moderators of this, right? Well, what I find interesting about that is like the people being called out have to be named, but everything else about Reddit is anonymous.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
So
although some people are public about their persona, like they are, let it be known, like, and this is my Instagram handle. So on the one hand, like it can sometimes get gross and like I don't feel good about the snarking because, as someone who has like had a voice on the internet as like a writer or other figure in other ways, it just feels not good to find yourself talked about. I mean, it's like you're walking into a room where people are gossiping about you and hearing what they're saying, and it doesn't feel great. And so sometimes I'm just like, is this tipping over into like unnecessary cruelty? And on the other hand, it is an excellent source of like contemporary knitting history where there have been things that have happened in the recent past in the knitting world that no one is really documenting in a comprehensive way. It's not like there's a big book that's being released that is, talking about some of these questions. I mean, it's in part why we started this channel, right? On YouTube, there has been a kind of rise of some channels that do indulge in gossip. I don't know. I don't even know if I need to use the word indulge, but for example, the channel Aspen in the Moment will go behind the scenes of, what happened to Joanne's fabrics, or like what was the history of Ravelry changing its design and alienating a lot of its users. And I think there is, I don't know, there's a lot out there that just goes away. And maybe some of it should just go away into the ether and never get talked about again. But maybe some of it should be documented and remembered because it's useful, or at least just like interesting.
Right. And again, this kind of, and as we've talked about a number of times on this podcast, just the DIY nature of crafting and the knitting world, and that inherently means that there aren't necessarily those more formal record keeping opportunities for what is happening. And so this is that space where the information is stored and how it's communicated, because we're out here getting a knitting article once every however many months in like a formal publication. But other than that, it's not necessarily being cataloged in the same way as other topics or whatever it might be.
And I found an interesting article in a peer-reviewed journal that I could not access for the life of me. I tried all of my tricks to try to get behind the paywall and could not open it. So if you have access to academic, like if you work for a university or whatever, it's called She's My Bitch Eating Crackers, Influencer Snark and the Digital Gossip Economy. So this was one of the things that came up when I searched for Craftsnark. So from the abstract, it identifies 3 areas of feminist scholarship where influencer snark responds to: gossip economies, anti-fandoms, and cancel culture. So I think you kind of see all 3 of those in the Craftsnark world, but I'm especially interested in the gossip economy and do see that as something that is part of the knitting world, maybe becoming a larger part, where people have platforms based on knitting gossip, whether that is gossiping about what happened to Joanne's fabrics or who doesn't produce size inclusive patterns. So when I think gossip economy, like maybe my first thought goes to like Us Weekly or something. But I think on a smaller scale, you can find it in the knitting world as well.
Yeah, which then maybe leads in nicely to our next kind of segment, where we wanted to give a few examples of gossip that in the last few years that we've seen kind of blow up in the knitting world. We want to really kind of try to give the big picture of what the gossip was, how it came about, and just kind of like the evolution of the story of these moments that were cataloged by the knitting world.
Alison, so when you think back on like recent gossip, recent knitting gossip, what do you think about?
So I think the first big one that I remember in my more active knitting life was the Woolen Folk debacle of 2023, which was dubbed Fire, like the Fire Festival that went very wrong many years before this. And so Woolen Folk was an auxiliary event that took place around Rhinebeck. So I was actually in Rhinebeck that year. So I heard about it the next day in one of the barns at Rhinebeck, like, oh, well, I went to Woolen Folk yesterday and it wasn't great. And then it just kind of blew up after that weekend. So it was one of these extra events that takes place outside of Rhinebeck, and it had tons of issues. It was majorly overcrowded. There were all these accessibility issues for people who couldn't even get in because of use of wheelchairs, for example. There was a ton of mud, which was not handled well. There were missing permits, like the whole process, like there were too many people for the space. There were items and events promised to the people attending that were not delivered on. And then the vendors themselves who were selling at this event, who'd had to put in money themselves to get a spot, did not see the sales that they were supposed to see, did not have the resources that they were supposed to have. And many of them ended up, coming back and suing the organizers of this event. And so I heard about this from this person who happened to attend at Rhinebeck, but then so much of the gossip surrounding this did happen on the internet. YouTube videos, the channel we mentioned, Aspen in the Moment, has a number of videos about this. People sharing their own experience, both as attendees of the event and what went wrong, as well as vendors were very disappointed in how it went. Definitely talked about a lot on Craftsnark. And in fact, when I was looking into it, I found a separate post on Craftsnark from a news reporter who was like, we've heard about this. We want to write a news article about this.
See, they know where to go.
Yeah, exactly. Please come talk to us about this. And we will link to that article below. It's like in a local paper. So that's certainly one that comes to mind when I think of knitting gossip. How about you, Anjali? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I also was fascinated by the woolen folk story, and it is an example of like trying to warn people about the free rider of whoever the organizer was, but also then it becomes like in the modern era, what is the line between like legitimate warning about a problematic person and cancel culture, where you are completely saying we will not accept anything anymore from this person, no matter what they say or do. So my example that I'm thinking about is more recent and kind of has to do with that cancel culture question, which is the recent dust up with Stephen West. Have you heard about it?
I have heard about it. We definitely texted about it as well when it was happening. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
So I'll preface this by saying I don't want to be super specific about names and like websites and things like that, because I don't want to platform some of the people in the story that truly do seem to be bad actors that I don't want to support. But we will put all the links below. So if you want to do a deep dive and better understand all the specifics, you are welcome to do so. Basically, what happened is Stephen West, who is a knitting designer, he also has his own yarn brand, and he owns a shop in Amsterdam, I believe, a yarn shop, was interviewed on a podcast, which turned out to be the podcast of an anti-cancel culture, that's self-described, an anti-cancel culture knitter who has been accused of being a white supremacist and is someone who, it's reported, has stalked and bullied people online, in particular knitters of color. So Stephen West was on this podcast, and the news, I didn't watch it, but I don't think the podcast itself was specifically about anything to do with like white supremacy or any sort of problematic topics like that. But this figure that invited him and interviewed him definitely is. So the kind of news, the gossip was shared initially on Craftsnark by a prominent knitting influencer account, also shared on Instagram as well, that Stephen West had been on this podcast. And he apologized. He posted a public apology on his Instagram. I would say, just as an apology, it was fine. It wasn't super. It was kind of like, oh yeah, I didn't know when he asked me, not really taking a lot of personal responsibility for what happened or acknowledging the harm that it might have caused to other people who had been harmed by this podcaster who was bullying and harassing people. And so people weren't really happy with that response and made it known that they didn't think that was enough of a response. So then he apologized again in a way that I felt was more just heartfelt and sincere and truly seeming to acknowledge that, like, while he didn't intend to hurt anyone by doing this, that didn't excuse the fact that people were hurt by seeing like a prominent knitwear designer, prominent figure in the knitting space, basically legitimizing this person who has apparently done some pretty reprehensible things.
But people were still not happy with that
Some
apology,
people
that second apology.
still were not
Did
happy.
not accept that. Yeah.
So then it's interesting because the tide kind of started to turn against the knitting influencer who had brought up the topic in the first place. And there was kind of a general feeling of like, is this too mean? Like, what do we want from him? And who was the free rider in this situation? Like these are the questions that people seem to be grappling with. It's like, is the free rider this Stephen West for appearing on this podcast without doing due diligence? Is it Stephen West because he appeared on this podcast and actually he's secretly like a white supremacist, which is what some people seem to be insinuating? Or is the free rider the influencer who is kind of profiting off of this gossip economy, and maybe not literally profiting, but getting attention from this gossip economy and sort of breaking the news of this story? So I just thought it was interesting to observe from afar the grappling with that question, and it really didn't really seem to have a resolution. And I don't know if I think I sent you a link to the Craftsnark thread that was asking, is this knit influencer the problem because this was too mean to pile on, and like we should now like forgive Stephen West? And I think there were like 1,000, over 900 comments, or 1,000 comments at the time I sent it to you. So I don't know if you have done any thinking about it like since or how you're thinking about the issue.
Yeah, like this specifically the Stephen West question.
Yeah, just like what is, I don't know, like I guess just cancel culture in the knitting world, and like what do we need from our public figures in order to feel okay about the mistakes that they've made?
I mean, I will say, I like you. I think that, and I think we see this with like cancel culture outside the knitting world too, where it's like I messed up and I'm trying to do it right, but there's no way that I can make up for this in a way that's going to appease everybody. So I don't, me personally, did I think that second apology from him, like there was a whole thing with like turning off the comments is not a real apology because then you're not letting people voice their opinion. So he was like, okay, I'm leaving the comments on in this case. And then I saw too, people being like, oh, he said he didn't know. That's not true. And that's where it does come into the space of gossip and not legal testimony or a well-vetted news article, whatever it may be, is like this. It is truly about what you believe, what your opinion is. In my understanding of Stephen West and having followed his whole career, don't think that he intentionally went on a podcast to promote white supremacy. And he said he didn't. And then people said that wasn't true. They saidness of it is part of what is inherently gossip, but also part of what makes it hard to maybe take action or form super concrete opinions or beliefs based on this kind of system, which I think maybe is why I don't engage so much. Like, while I want to make good and informed decisions about where I'm putting my money, for example, based on what I think is the kind of people I want to support in the world, I also don't need my entire knitting Instagram to be this. Do you know what I mean? Like, I will follow it for so long, and then I'm like, I'm going to just take a step back from that.
Yeah. So I do think that the like algorithm of social media has something to do with it. And when I was like had a more active public platform as anti-racist dietitian, I was sort of pointing out things in the food and nutrition world that were like hypocritical or free riders, like people who didn't have people's best interests in mind. And the sort of push to be negative all the time was so strong. Like
that was where you saw the engagement.
Yes, like getting towards the edge of, and I tried to not be entirely negative because I think that's just not good for me and it's not good for the world to just focus on what is wrong, like just complain, like point out this person doing something wrong, point out this thing that should be different. And I'm more about like, okay, point out what's wrong, but also like, what is the solution? Like, let's think about something that we can build with what we know is not working. But there's no algorithm like that is like rewarding you for trying to build and be positive. It's so anytime anything got snarky at all, like people just wanted more. They were just like hungry for it in the comments and definitely in the engagement. So I can see how if you are, especially if you are like financially relying on being some sort of influencer, the draw towards the negativity and the drama and really pushing things as far as possible is something that like the algorithm and technology are driving. I think just kind of catering to people's basest instincts, unfortunately.
Right, which is where this gossip piece of like sometimes it is just bitching
Yeah.
comes into play and is clearly a factor.
But it's different when you're bitching about somebody that you still have to be in physical proximity with, which I feel like is another theme of this season is like, if you still have to live in community with that person, you still have to deal with them. Like you aren't just going to be like going up to their face and like yelling at them like the way you do in a Craftsnark comment, you know?
And an anonymous post that,
Yes.
you know, you have no, I mean, which is such a part of the downside of internet culture, the anonymity. And again, plenty of studies on this, plenty of research on like the anonymous piece, making it easier to be meaner.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily the, you know, we're not the issues we've talked about before. I think that most of the people involved are not completely anonymous, but the kind of like, you know, Craftsnark comment section, the people engaging with it without necessarily identifying themselves at all is much more the majority.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you don't have to order coffee from that person tomorrow morning.
Right.
So, yeah. So I feel like, yes, gossip has existed probably since the beginning of knitting, but it most likely was much more human than it is now. What do you think about gossip?
Yeah, curious what you all think, if they're particularly, if you found yourself latching on to certain knitting gossip stories. What were those stories? Why did they get their talons in you in a certain way? What did you think about them? You know, how does knitting gossip play out in your, if you have like a knit night or knitting circles, what do you see? Or has there been a moment where you have had a really positive experience with gossip where it has kept you from something that would have been a bad experience, but you got the heads up that that was not something or someone you should involve yourself with? So tell us, please let us know. All right, Anjali, this week, took what you did last week. I took the structure of what you did in our last episode, but I kind of redid it. So we're back to 2 stitches enter, 1 stitch leaves.
Nailed it.
Yes. Yeah. Woohoo. Still haven't seen Mad Max. Still don't plan on it, but so I'm going to share my screen because that worked well last time.
Okay.
2 similar patterns and you decide which one you would make.
I'm ready.
So let me see if I can do this. Share screen. What a win. There we go. All right. So the first one is, would you rather make the Storm Sweater by Petite Knit or the Staffen Sweater by Craftsnark? So they're both kind of like Gainsey inspired.
Yes.
Even the same color, which I didn't realize when I put the picture side by side.
Yeah. And is the Staffen the one that comes with like a lot of different, like the sweater and the vest and or no?
Stand by. Great question. Because Craftsnark does tend to do that. Which maybe we could have a whole episode about this, is when you see the designers who are like, I'm going to release the same thing 12 different times and you have to pay for each single one of them, versus here's this bigger pattern that costs more, or maybe not even more, but it's a whole thing. So it looks like cardigan, sweater, and vest for the Staffen.
So I would choose that one. I've mentioned that I watched Craftsnark's channel and I really admire like the business that she's built and like the values that she brings to it. So, I also like the Storm Sweater, and I've knitted both their patterns and I slightly prefer Craftsnark's writing style. So that's the one I'd take, because I think I would like a vest option as well.
There you go. That's the one that's leaving. Next, we have, one of these is definitely like on my to-do list. So is the other one, and mine is I'm going Storm.
Okay.
with the past one. But okay, next is, I actually don't know these pattern names off the top of my head. The one on the left is Retrosaria Rosa Pomar's sheep sweater, and the one on the right is Caitlin Hunter's sheep sweater.
I prefer Retrosaria Rosa Pomar's sweater, both the look, and I have also knitted patterns from both of these designers, and I prefer the writing style of Rosa Pomar's patterns. So
I will
can't even
say,
tell, is the one on the right, I can't even tell it's a sheep.
yeah, it's like the little the red part in the middle is it's
From
facing
head on.
you.
Got
Yeah,
it,
head
got it,
on,
got it. Yeah.
not from the
yeah.
side. Will it change your mind to know that the Rosa Pomar one is steeked? No.
Sure. Yeah.
What an opportunity.
I
What a
just
chance.
love her work too. Also the yarns and everything and general philosophy. And Caitlin Hunter, some of her patterns, I just don't trust it. Like all the salmon one, that's all, you know what I'm talking about?
You don't trust that it's going to like fit you the way you want it to?
Yeah.
When we get to Two Women Happy About It, I'm actually making one of her patterns right now that I'm very much enjoying. But
Okay, good.
yeah, this is why, again, different
It's all personal.
different strokes for different folks. Okay.
Yeah.
And the last one is, I actually don't have strong feelings about this one.
So what would you choose of the last one?
Retrosaria, that's on my
Okay,
to-do list.
yeah.
I really
Yeah,
like
I
that
love that
one
one.
a lot. Although, and could have been a threesome, there's a third sheep sweater, which is the Princess Diana one with the one black
yeah.
sheep. That's also pretty good. And you can get that
Yeah,
pattern.
I like that
And the money
one.
goes to Doctors Without Borders.
Oh, cool.
The final showdown, I believe. So the butterscotch sweater on the
Uh-oh.
left and the newspaper sweater on the right. They both, I was trying to find similar ones. These both use two-color brioche. You have
really
to
like
pick
either of these, to be honest. But I guess I like the one on the left a little
the
more.
butterscotch.
The butterscotch. Yeah, I like the fit better. The one on the right looks a little too close to the body, which I guess I'm sure I could make it larger, but it looks like a raglan rather than a drop shoulder. So
Yes, true.
might not look as
Or maybe
good
just both of these.
larger.
They fight to the death, both of them, and they're both.
Yeah, you're out.
Yeah, no one.
Who's
no
the
one
designer?
leaves.
Who's the designer for the one on the left?
Nash Knits,
Okay,
I believe, is
don't
the
know them.
handle on.
I'm not a big two-color brioche person. I feel like it has a tendency to look messy, and I don't think I'm good at enough at brioche to make it not look messy.
That was 2 stitches enter, 1 stitch leaves.
That was great, Allison. Now, what is making you happy about knitting?
So I am following through on a few things that, like, I'm doing some long-term planning follow through, which does involve casting on. So I am like starting new projects, but things that not just like spontaneous, oh, here's some yarn, here's a pattern, I'm going to try it. It's like things that I've been thinking about for so long. One is
you're like spring cleaning your brain.
Yes. And sort of I'm doing the thing where I sort of use my stash, but then to use my stash, I had to buy more yarn.
It's fine. It's allowed.
Classic yarn move, classic knitting move. But so the first is the Alpine Autumn. So we'll show the pattern, but for a very long time, I have wanted to knit it in many colors. Do you know that one? But I've wanted to do a like super colorful one. So here's what it looks like.
Ooh, I love that.
I'm blocking the yoke because I'm doing so many things wrong. I have so many sins against this project already. Barely swatched in not color work and like kind of made gauge. So making a size. Now I'm worried it's too small. That's the sin I committed. It was that. But I wanted to swatch it, or I wanted to block at this point to see how it's fitting. I might have to add one more round of increases that is not written in the pattern. So that'll be a fun thing to do. I also do like to like do something new. Like I like to say, oh, and here's something I've never done before when I'm doing a project. So I actually, some of these rows involve 3 colors at the same time, which I've never done.
Wow. Yeah.
So that has been fun to do. Don't know if it's one of those things where it's like I had this vision. I don't know that it is the vision I had, but I think I still like it. I think I might make it short sleeve. It's sport weight. Another thing I'd wanted to do, like a garment in sport weight that is more lightweight. It's Queen City yarn, I think is the name. Queen City yarn, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had gotten the base color like a long time ago and had in mind for like a couple years ago. And I was like, I'm going to do this is for the Alpine Autumn. And now I need my contrast
Mm-hmm.
colors. And I was going to use something else, but then went to Yarn Centric. So I did not go to Maryland Sheep and Wool because I had to be out of town for the weekend, but went to one of their auxiliary events, which is the Friday before it's not their event, but an event around Maryland Sheep and Wool, which is this extra event called Yarn Centric. And Queen City Yarn was there, and I saw that they had the same palette, and I was like, I'm gonna go with this. So I bought 3 more skeins of yarn. But and because I was traveling, I had a lot of train and car time, and so I really am flying through it, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, I made the Alpine hat, and I really liked the color
Oh yeah, you
work.
showed it on an episode this season, I think.
I think I showed the halibut. I made the halibut cowl.
Oh,
I
cowl.
enjoyed that less. I know I ended up frogging the hat because if you ever make the Alpine hat, look up the reviews because the color work is too high for a hat, and you need to look for the modified color work chart.
I had the same experience. I was going way off gauge to begin with, so I thought it was my fault. So actually, that's good to hear. I think color work hats are tough. Like I like a folded brim, and it allows for like kind of some wiggle room, but with colorwork hats, it's like usually not. And so it's hard to get the shape totally right.
Yeah.
But I do like the motif a lot. Anjali, what's making you happy about knitting?
So I have my first opportunity to do a bucket list thing that I didn't know was on my bucket list, which is bartering for my knitting. I will be
Nice.
getting some free haircuts in exchange for knitting a Burgos vest. So I walked in to get my haircut a few weeks ago and was wearing my Burgos vest, aka my Hobbit vest. And my stylist was like, "Oh my God, what is that vest? Where'd you get it?" And I was like, "I made it." And then she got very excited.
And that's how you thought it was going to end. And you were going to be so happy that she asked you that you made it. And that was going to be your thrill for the day.
And she was just like, couldn't stop looking at it, kind of half jokingly was like, would you make me one for a haircut? And I was like, oh my God, yeah. And then she toward the end was like, well, it should be like probably 2 haircuts. And I was like, yeah, that seems fair. So obviously we all know when it comes to like hours of labor, like it's not a fair trade for like a 1-hour haircut for however, like two 1-hour haircuts for however long it takes to make a vest. But it's just fun, and I love that pattern.
And that's the thing about bartering is that like it doesn't have to be a 1-to-1
right
capitalist. What is the dollar
like,
value on
my
this?
labor? Yeah, I'm not like sitting down and calculating my costs per hour of my labor because I'm doing something that I enjoy. And she had wanted basically like an exact replica of what I have, which is made out of what's the like really itchy Iceland wool?
Letlopi?
Yes, which is made out of this like acorn brown Letlopi. And I was like, I don't really want to sit
Do
there
you
and
want
like
that?
knit. Yeah.
Also, do you want that? I don't think you want that.
And
wait,
so
and yours is Letlopi?
Mine is Letlopi because this was like this was maybe like the second garment I ever knit, and I was like, Letlopi is cheap, and I think it looks really cool, and I'm sure should I ever be in the Shire needing to survive like a spring night, it'll be wonderful. But
you're
just
gonna outlive all the other hobbits.
So yes. So I'm doing hairstyle designs, the Aran Waits one that's like inspired by waterways or whatever. It's like a deep chocolate brown. I will link it below. But I'm excited about that because I have used that yarn in a different color for my Lume and really liked working with it. So I think it'll be a nice experience, and I'll get to pick out some fun buttons, hopefully.
Ooh, nice. Always fun.
Yes.
Anjali, what do you want to yell about that is other than knitting?
So something exciting that I'm looking for, just summer in general. I need a break. I'm tired. But this summer, my family and I are going to Japan, which is very exciting. I have not been there since I moved away from living there from that aforementioned knitting group in the early 2000s. So it's been over 20 years.
Are you going back
since
to that place?
So we're not going to be like spending most of our time there because I lived in a pretty small city. I don't know. But we're staying in the general like central Japan area, which is where I lived and like where I am most familiar with and like just the kind of stuff that I want to revisit. So we're doing a lot. Actually, we're going to be there for 2 weeks. We're going to Tokyo, of course, and then Nagoya, going to try to get tickets to Ghibli Park. I think that's the one that's next to Nagoya. And then renting a car and driving up through some of the small towns in the Japanese Alps. So going to this town called Gujo Hachiman, where they celebrate this festival called Obon, which is like the sort of festival of the dead. And the way that they celebrate it there is people dance all night for like almost a whole month. So we're going on, it won't be an all night dancing night, but like we'll be pretty late, especially for having a 6-year-old. So doing that, which is going to be awesome because I just love Japanese festivals. They're really fun, especially in smaller towns. And then staying kind of like in the highlands of the Japanese Alps for a couple nights in this cabin. And then a couple nights in Kanazawa, which is like an alternative to Kyoto if you don't want to deal with the crowds of Kyoto, which have like a lot of artisans and also there's a lot in Gujo Hachiman as well. So I'll be on the lookout for artisanal textile crafts. And then from Kanazawa, going back to Tokyo for a night and then getting out of there. I've been having fun like planning and just thinking about like what are the things that I want to do and also thinking about like it's going to be super hot there, so what can we do that will keep us cool. And my husband has been there before because we were dating when I lived in Japan, but my kids have not. And my older son is very into anime and manga, so he's super excited to just be steeped in that world.
Very cool.
So yeah. How about you, Allison? What are you yelling about other than knitting?
So Anjali knows all about this, but not even. I have devoted so many hours to this in the last couple of weeks. Some of you may know Canada in December, I believe, passed a law to change qualification for citizenship. It used to be you had to have like a parent or maybe there were special cases, but now they've removed kind of the generational leap that you can make. Like you can trace back further than you used to be able to. And I've gotten real into that. Shout out to Canada's record-keeping system. I'm sure we have some librarians who watch. If you're a librarian or Canadian, just trying to find American documents. Like there's Ancestry.com and they kind of find, but Canada, the systems that you can go into, the digitized census systems, the digitized like local newspaper records, and it's all so searchable and amazing. And I've done a lot of compiling.
Do you have all your paperwork in order? Because also my husband is doing this as well because his great-great-grandparents on both sets of maternal great-great-grandparents are French Canadian and came down to New England from Quebec. So we are also, or he's more deep in
on this journey. So I've been doing all this research and it's really the great-great-grandmother that this is the linchpin here. There are like over 50 people in the United States, well over 50, who could trace back to this great-great-grandmother. So we'll see how that goes. So anybody out there who maybe has gone through this process, let us know because my next step is to kind of like make sure that's all in order because I do think we are going to try to submit it. Anyway.
And if you have any tips on traveling around Japan, looking for knitting related things, I have a list of knitting stores in Tokyo I want to visit, but
that made me think.
Please let me know.
Yeah. This is our last episode of the season, our last official episode.
I can't believe it.
We did talk about doing a bonus episode on Canadian citizenship, but maybe now I've jumped the gun on that and we'll do something else.
We gave up all our good content.
Shoot. I think we have a third season in our future.
Yes.
We have so enjoyed doing this and hearing from you all and making that kind of slightly parasocial, but no less genuine community of just hearing from people who watch us regularly and engage with us. And it's just been a real treat.
Yeah. And if you have any thoughts on what we should talk about next season, feel free to add those in the comments as well. And not sure when we'll be back. Haven't discussed that yet.
Do some schedule talks, but
yes. Yeah. But probably you all will be stepping away from your knitting a bit anyway and enjoying the good weather and summer.
All right. Bye.
Bye.